There is a certain irony to me making a new video on Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. Technically, I discussed this game back in my review on X1 from 2016, and in the spring of 2018 I did a whole video on the game to make up for it. One where I laughed at how bad my 2016 portion was. But the 2018 video was literally audio I recorded at like 3:30 in the morning while suffering from a cold. Truly the worst thing you could possibly do for a video. But luckily, I am not as arrogant as to make fun of old work while being a goof in a completely different fashion anymore. I think. As I have said before, I don't see the harm in a re-review. If you think you've grown and have more to say / want to do a more definitive job, I say why not. Mega Man Maverick Hunter X released for the PlayStation Portable in 2005, and was a remake of Mega Man X, a Super Nintendo classic from 1993. This game came hot off the heels of Mega Man X8, and I mean that literally. Depending on your region, these games were released within months of each other. This was back in the 2000s when Capcom was launching Mega Man games like a machine gun every year, but anyway, Sony released the PlayStation Portable in 2005. Their first move into handheld gaming, a logical choice given the fact that they just had two of the best and most popular consoles of all time. The PSP didn't reach the audience that the Nintendo DS did back in the day, but the sales were still quite good in the PSP. The team behind the X series knew they wanted to make an X game for the PlayStation Portable, but had to decide on whether or not they wanted to make a full-on X9 or just reboot the series. Given the chance for a new audience on PSP, they decided to go back and retell the iconic origin story of Mega Man X for a new age, thus giving us Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. Even though the developers had intended to take advantage of a new platform to expand their audience with this one, it unfortunately didn't work out. Maverick Hunter X and the later released remake of Mega Man 1 titled Mega Man Powered Up both were considered financial failures by Capcom, despite being met with overall positive reception from critics and fans. Although I will admit, I still have never played much of Mega Man Powered Up. I really should get to that at some point. It'll get its own video when I finally get to that classic Mega Man retrospective. But I'm going to look past the sales aspect of this game right now because I want to focus on what makes the game so good in its own merits, because this is definitely one of the best Mega Man games. I have a lot of respect for this project, because it first overcame the issues facing the Mega Man X series before this. I mean, if you've seen the previous X videos I've done, you'll know that Mega Man X1, X2, X3, and X4 are some of my favorite games of all time. Definitely my favorite side-scrollers. But I thought X5, X6, X7, and X8 all missed the mark for various reasons, even though X5 and X8 can still be enjoyed in spite of that fact. Hell, X6 can as well, as I've come to realize over the years. Point is, to make a great game after all that is a job well done. But then they made a game that stands on its own as a remake of Mega Man X1, one of the most iconic and highly regarded Mega Man games to ever be released. So today we're going to discuss how the game plays, and how its aspects compare to the previous games in the series. One of the first questions that comes to mind with most remakes is, what's it going to look like? In the case of Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, I find it interesting to look back and use this game as a case study for how far handheld games had come in just a few years. Last week I covered the Mega Man Extreme duology, and in those two games we got a plethora of assets from Mega Man X1 and the other two SNES X games reinterpreted for the Game Boy Color. That was back in 2000 on hardware from 1998, and they had to downsize everything to this extent. But here we have the PSP 5 years later, and Mega Man X received this absolute glow-up. Visually speaking, Maverick Hunter X technically falls into the same pitfalls as X8, where I said many of its assets, even on PS2, looked really low-res and pixelated. I just thought the game looked unappealing on the eyes. However, Maverick Hunter X has the added benefit of releasing on a handheld with a significantly smaller screen and resolution, so it's not as much of a bother. It would absolutely distract me more if I upped the internal resolution in an emulator like I used to, but when playing at the native resolution, many things will look out of place, like this plane on Storm Eagle's level looking like a PNG keyframing across the background, but most everything else works just fine. I love how many visual details they added to this game, like how these copter enemies will laugh at you if they hit you. I never noticed that before. Stages will have details added to increase the immersion, like how beating Storm Eagle's level still causes his ship to crash into the factory of spark mandrills like the original, but at the start of the stage this is clearly communicated with the ship wreckage being right there. In the original, you just have to put two and two together to understand that taking down this ship is why the power isn't working. I like how the first Sigma Fortress stage becomes covered in spiderwebs the closer you get to the boss, foreshadowing the boss fight against Bow Spider, something the original couldn't do. They added a toll booth to this part of the intro stage. A toll booth. That doesn't have to be there, but it is, and all of it makes the world feel more cohesive. So when talking about how the game fares as a remake visually, I'd say the job was well done. But let's get down to brass tacks. The gameplay. By this point, Mega Man X gameplay was pretty much nailed down. Mega Man Maverick Hunter X is exactly what you'd expect. You run, you jump, you shoot, lining your shots up with enemies is the most important thing as you avoid their attacks and the obstacles laid out in front of you. At this point, I think I've given this speech on the fundamentals of Mega Man like 10 times in my YouTube career, so I shall get to the point. Maverick Hunter X plays like X8. I can definitely see how at the beginning of development it was a toss-up between a full-on sequel or a reboot of the series, because fundamentally this is still a spiritual successor to X8. Although because it's a remake of X1, X cannot air dash as default like you could in X7 and X8, because he can't even dash on the ground at the start, let alone air dash, because that wasn't unlockable in X2. And of course, X8 specific mechanics like the two armors and the team system are not in, but that goes without saying since this is a remake of X1. But of course, they did bring in conveniences from later games into the X1 experience, like full button mapping being available from the pause screen and not just the main menu like the original game, and you can escape to the stage select without having to beat the stage first, which is also quite handy if you want to get some items before tackling a boss. But when compared to X8, the biggest difference for me is the handling. Now this is small, but it's still the biggest gap between the two for me. Every time I talk about X8, I mention how smooth it controlled, and I still maintain that X8 feels the best to play of any X game. This game is styled after that one, but I just find that dash jumping off of walls, or even on the ground for example, is just less smooth than X8, where you had a real flow to your jumps. Here, it's like everything just feels much heavier to do. It's a really weird thing to discuss, and I honestly can't even be certain if this is true. I just feel like that when playing the game, and I've always felt this way as someone who's played both of these games for years and years. I've always noticed that there was some kind of difference in how they handle, but I could never put it into words. And I think it's just that Maverick Hunter X feels slightly delayed compared to the snappy controls of X8. I can't prove it with X's actual controls, but the one area I can prove it with would be the charge shot. I always thought X took too long to charge his shots in this game. I made this point in my last video on this game as well. But now, I have the math, because I compared the footage in my editing software. In the Super Nintendo games, it took X roughly 70 frames to reach his full charge shot, and then roughly 150 to get to the third charge shot level. In the PlayStation games, your default rate was about 60 frames and 45 for X8. In Maverick Hunter X, it takes about 90 frames for the full charge shot and then 210 for the third level. This usually throws me off when playing since I'm expecting much faster response time because I'm used to the other games. But I'm only saying this because it's something I noticed as a big fan of the series. This is really nitpicky stuff. However, Maverick Hunter X actually doesn't suffer too much from these differences from the other games, especially X8, because I'd play this any day over X8. If you watched my recent video on that game, you'd know that for me, the big pros of X8 more or less ends with the controls. The level design and item game of X8 just didn't do it for me. Here, we don't have to worry about the level design because Maverick Hunter X faithfully reconstructs the levels you remember from X1, basically shot for shot, which is quite good because these are levels I already enjoy. What has changed that is worth talking about is the item game. That's the part of talking about Mega Man X that gets me the most excited because 100%ing these games and finding different, more efficient ways to do it is one of my biggest reasons why X1, X2, X3, and X4 are all some of my favorite games ever made. The other games all fumbled the ball here with X5's backtrack-oriented design, X6's alternate routes making player routing really pointless, X7 being X7, and X8 being too convoluted for its own good. And that's coming from someone who thinks Mega Man X3 is an amazing game for Pete's sake. Maverick Hunter X brings it back to square one. You have 8 heart tanks to collect that expand your maximum health bar, 4 sub-tanks that refill your health when they have sufficient energy, and 4 main Dr. Light capsules where X can upgrade his armor. The foot parts give you the ability to dash in the ground for rapid bursts of speed, the arm parts allow you to charge your shots to a 3rd level and charge your special weapons, the head parts give X the ability to smash blocks with his head, and the body parts reduce the damage that X takes by 50%, and together they make up X's first armor, yada yada yada. All of this is from X1. But what has changed would be the way the items are arranged. And these are slight mix-ups, but they have an impact on how the player approaches Maverick Hunter X. The foot parts are acquired in this upper path of Flame Mammoth stage, instead of being given to you in the middle of Chill Penguin stage, and this is the one change that could have actually made routing in Maverick Hunter X superior to the original. If you play X1 with my stage order, you'd start with Chill Penguin and then have to come back to this stage to use Fire Wave to get this heart tank. Getting the foot parts instead of the arm parts at Flame Mammoth stage could have cut this entire stage revisit out of the game, but there's just one problem. The sub-tank in Flame Mammoth stage was something you could get with the foot parts alone in the original game, but now you need the head parts, something located in Chill Penguin stage that requires the foot parts to get. If they just left this sub-tank the same as the original, you could actually, not counting the Hadouken, get through X1 without backtracking, like in X2, and I think that improvement would have definitely given Maverick Hunter X a lot of points for me at least. But instead, how I play this game is thus. Flame Mammoth first, Chill Penguin second, then I backtrack to Flame Mammoth for that sub-tank, then I go to Storm Eagle where the body parts are now, and if you're feeling ballsy, you can go to Sting Chameleon stage after this, which is where the arm parts are, and you can make it to this heart tank with a charged shotgun ice. I do these 2 stages either 3rd or 4th. even if the boss is one of the tougher ones in the game. I then go to Boomerang Kawanger, which I did in the original game, but that was to cut down a backtrack on the sub-tank and Spark Mandrill stage. Here, a least backtracking run requires going to this stage before Spark Mandrill because the heart tank in that stage is no longer reachable with a dash jump. You need Boomerang Cutter. So therefore I go to Boomerang Kawanger first of these two. After Kawanger, I go to Spark Mandrill, then Armored Armadillo, and end the game on Launch Octopus, and finally revisit Armored Armadillo's stage for the Hadouken. This item has been changed for the better, actually. In the original, you had to reach the end of the stage and willingly jump into this abyss a few times before the capsule would appear, but in the remake, you just need to reach the end without taking damage, which I think is fun as you charge up Rolling Shield or Chameleon Sting and then equip another weapon like Storm Tornado or Fire Wave and just tear through the enemies. Although, like the original, I hate how when I fire the Hadouken, sometimes the game will fire a buster shot and that will hit the enemies, activating their iframes, meaning the Hadouken won't hit them. All in all, the item game in Maverick Hunter X works, and I think the remixed elements like the new capsule locations are good changes. However, I just think it would have been cool if they redesigned it in a way where you didn't have to backtrack at all, because the way it is, they made changes to item locations, but it doesn't produce a meaningful change in the experience. But there's more to the game than even that. Once you beat it, it has a lot of extra content, such as a harder difficulty mode. This sees X taking more damage than he does in normal mode and also giving the bosses more difficult attack patterns. For example, Chill Penguin will do this attack where he fires shotgun ice and it ricochets off the wall like it does when you get that weapon from him. Usually when I revisit this game, I tend to play it on hard mode just for the sake of the extra challenge. It helps make the experience stand out from the original more. I also like how you get different dialogue between X and the various Mavericks in hard mode. On the first run, they make X sound a lot more like what you'd expect, where he tries to be nice before a fight.
Answer me, Storm Eagle! You're not the type of Reploid to do something like this!
But then, on hard mode, he's ready to reduce the Mavericks to scrap metal.
Storm Eagle! Have you gone Maverick too?
I won't deny that.
If that's the case, I have no choice but to destroy you. It's my duty as a Maverick Hunter.
It was so cool because I used to play this game all the time on the Vita, and suddenly on one playthrough all the dialogue was changed. It was the neatest of neat moments. The team behind this game wanted to add some kind of new element that would really stand out. Of course, they thought about including a Zero campaign, however they felt like the idea would be, by this point, predictable and not that exciting as a result. Playing as Zero was a selling point in both X3 and X4, and by the time of Maverick Hunter X is released, you could play as Zero in well over half the Mega Man X games, and he had his own series on Game Boy Advance. No, they wanted to do something new. So instead, we got a playable campaign starring the ex-Maverick Hunter Vile, coming in with a brand new gameplay style. This review is actually the first time I ever fully completed Vile's story in this game, and I will say, it's an interesting mode. I use that word because I enjoyed my time with it now that I've made the dedicated effort to finish it, after 7 years of owning the game. However, it's also not so fun that I'd play it again. How it works is that you play as Vile through the intro stage, the 8 Maverick stages, and the first 3 castle stages, battling X at the end of the intro stage, and First Armored X teamed up with Zero at the end of the game. Vile was set free from jail by Sigma to help cause chaos in the midst of his rebellion, but Vile doesn't like the fact that Sigma views X as crucial for the evolution of Reploids and wants to prove he's the best by taking down Sigma's forces himself, only to get beat by X and Zero anyway, once he thought he had the upper hand on them. In terms of the gameplay, Vile cannot dash, nor can he charge his shots. Instead, he comes with 3 weapons: finger bullets, a cannon that fires in the air, and bombs that he drops from his knees. All these attacks can be activated from the air and from the ground. By defeating bosses, Vile will get a ton of new weapons from each one, but you can only equip 1 handgun, 1 cannon blast, and 1 knee bomb at a time. But as they progressively get more powerful, they cost more points to equip, so you have to decide which ones you want to take with you that stay at or below your maximum point capacity, like the skill shop in Sonic Generations. I was partial to the ice handgun and the blue napalm bomb. This is a good idea and it creates a lot of customization, however I feel like if I'm playing Maverick Hunter X again, I'm just gonna do it as X. I mean, Vile's mode starts off rough. He just does not have the health or mobility to survive the early game enemies, but once you get past that, there are other things I didn't like, such as the altered level design. Like this series of moving platforms at the end of Armored Armadillo's stage where I could barely see what I was doing and died like 3 times. I also didn't really care for the remixed item locations. That's not the worst idea either, and in some levels I'm fine with it, like Chill Penguins where you find the right armor at the end of this path and use it to smash the igloo at the start to grab a heart tank. Roughly the same idea as X's playthrough, but a little different for variety's sake. But other ones are annoying, like trying to bring this right armor to the end of the path of platforms in Storm Eagle stage, or are just stupid, like needing to not destroy this submarine and instead jumping on top of its weapons and finding a platform that carries you over to an item. I was never gonna think of that without a guide. I did like how some items had multiple methods of approach, like how I think I was supposed to use the right armor to get this item in Sting Chameleon stage, but it exploded and I shot the boomerang weapon into the air, which grabbed the item for me. Although on that note, I thought the ride armors were a little lame. Vile and his ride armors are iconic, and yet you only ride them for like 30 seconds per every time they appear, but if you take damage, that time goes down even more. So all in all, this was an interesting mode to play, but like I said, you won't see me trying it again anytime soon. But, to the credit of the devs, it was cool and unique to play the story from a villain's perspective. Doubly because Vile just has this I'm evil and I love it energy about him in this game, and I'm here for it. Generally speaking, I thought the story was really well done in this game. That's another thing you'd hope a remake would nail. In the case of the original X, the game had a limited story for the sake of keeping the pace going in an action platform shooter. And because copious amounts of dialogue in platformers just wasn't a thing back then. Maverick Hunter X takes the origin story of X and does a lot of great things with it. For starters, X has dialogue interactions with all 8 of the Maverick bosses, and we get to see what their personalities are like. Prior to playing this game, I never would have thought Launch Octopus's personality was that he was like Squidward tentacles if he was more snooty, and yet here we are. X has a history with all of these bosses you fight, because in X1, each Maverick was a former Maverick Hunter, having joined Sigma's rebellion, and X does not want to fight old friends like this, but he has to. I like how X has the same voice actor he did in X8, not only because I think this is just the best voice X has ever had, but because we get to see a different side of X in this one. By X8, X is just an entirely calm and collected powerhouse, even if he hates all the fighting. But here we see a much younger X who doesn't have all the power he will later, but a massive drive to fight the Maverick hordes anyway. But is otherwise still the soft-spoken hero we've come to know in the previous games. The best part about the whole story is what they did with Sigma. It's no secret that I think the X series using Sigma in every single game was an absolute mistake. It devalued the new villains each game would introduce by having Sigma show up at the end, and it also led to Sigma becoming more of a circus clown himself than a truly menacing bad guy. Something I want to expand on in next week's video. But obviously, when remaking Mega Man X, of course, Sigma is the main antagonist, and this is by far his best appearance of all time. For starters, when interacting with the other Mavericks, we see how Sigma was able to manipulate each and every one of them to his side in different ways, just by the way they talk about him. Chill Penguin joined Sigma because of the fact that he got paid and figured it would be more interesting than being a Maverick Hunter anyway. Armored Armadillo, on the other hand, is just loyal to Sigma, the former commanding officer of the Maverick Hunters. Sigma played into Launch Octopus's vanity by propping up his artistic talents, and the list goes on. But the game makes sure to show how Sigma really feels about these Reploids he dragged into his war when you first fight Launch Octopus in the castle stages.
Launch Octopus?
I am Launch Octopus. I am under orders to deal with any intruders.
Sigma must have brought his body back to life.
Sigma brought all 8 of these Reploids back to life just to be cannon fodder for X before he can reach Sigma. He doesn't give a damn about any of them. He just says what he needs to say to get what he wants. And X understands this, which is part of why he hates Sigma so much. The team behind this went above and beyond by not only packing the story full of details like this, but also included a full 20-something minute movie called The Day of Sigma that shows the events shortly before the game where Sigma was still the charismatic leader of the Maverick Hunters, and what it was that caused him to want to rebel against and wipe out humanity. He used to see X's pacifist tendencies as a flaw in X's design, but Dr. Kane, who discovered X and used his blueprints to create Reploid kind, tells Sigma that this sensitivity is actually what makes X so stand out from the rest of the Reploids. It makes X basically indistinguishable from humans, convincing Sigma that Reploids can evolve to become the dominant species on Earth, and X growing to his full potential is a core part of that, which Sigma seeks to make happen at any cost.
So to take advantage of this power of his, you're planning to go Maverick?
Precisely.
Capcom actually included the Day of Sigma in the Mega Man X Legacy Collection, marking it as a prequel to X1. The Maverick Hunter's field guide even references it, so that could lead someone to believe that it's canon to the mainline X series, with or without Maverick Hunter X as a game. The story between the two games is basically the same, so I guess you could look at this version of X1 as canon to the series if you wanted to, however I just choose not to. For starters, Sigma's motivation for going Maverick in the remake is so tied to X and his potential when in games like X2, X4, and X5, it seems Sigma doesn't really care that much about X. His backstory and motives are so tied to Zero in the mainline games. In fact, Sigma's iconic scars were something that X had done to him in the Day of Sigma, which directly conflicts with X4 showing that it was Zero when he first discovered him. It's not that this is impossible to reconcile, but I just don't regard Maverick Hunter X stuff as canon. The biggest reason why is that Dr. Kane gets blown up in Sigma's missile attack, but aids X and Zero in X2 and X3. The man is literally on life support in Day of Sigma and says he's prolonged his life for as long as he could. I just don't think he'd survive this attack, but hey, no body was shown on the screen, so by comic book logic, anything could happen after that. But I totally get why people would ignore these tiny points to regard the film, at least, as canon because the characterization is great throughout. The movie highlights how far Sigma's willing to go this early on in his time as a Maverick. The original Mega Man X starts with the Central Highway under attack, but through this short film we have the backstory that X and Zero failed to stop Sigma at the missile base where he launched all the missiles on the city at once, giving you some context for the start of the game, and the same sense of urgency X feels having to put a stop to Sigma, which all comes together at the end of the game. The castle stages have been mixed up somewhat to include whole portions of Maverick stages being brought back right before you fight that boss again, which I also thought was a nice touch. Makes the refights feel less random, as you start stage 2 for example in a cavern, which of course ends with a fight against Armored Armadillo. One of the better changes is that you find Vile at the end of stage 3 and see Zero's death here as well. I think it's better to place this right before the final battle against Sigma, as that gives the players and X yet another spark in the battle with Sigma, as opposed to the original where it happens at the very start of Sigma Palace Stage 1. If you didn't get the arm parts from Dr. Light, Zero will give you his, and this actually has a different effect than Light's in this game, doing respectable damage on the bosses, so that's pretty cool. When you reach the final boss, you can use the Hadouken on him, which I believe was technically possible in the original, but very rare to do. Here it's pretty easy. However, if you decide to face the final boss, it's a pretty good reinvention of the old boss, as he actually moves the arms of the mech instead of the hands just floating in the sky. Although points off for how these lasers just poof off the screen, but it doesn't matter. Defeat Sigma however you see fit, and you'll get the ending, and this one has always been one of my favorites in the X series. You see a flashback to when Dr. Kane first found X, and then Dr. Light's final message plays after having finished creating X, but having to seal him away because he's going to pass away before X will be fully finished. The final message of Dr. Light was how the original game opened, but it's much better at the end of the game where you really hear from the actor how close he is to the end of his life. The thing I like about this ending is how X doesn't say a word throughout it. We just hear this message from Light about how X will bring about a new age for the relationship between humans and robots, and how he'll fight for the good of all people over footage of X in the wake of Sigma's defeat. I just like how X is someone who always continues to fight for justice in the face of any loss or tragedy, even if those things weigh on him a lot, because that's just what he does. X was victorious against Sigma, but his best friend Zero didn't survive the mission, and you get reminded of that fact when X looks at Zero's bike in the garage. Sigma, the former leader of the Maverick Hunters, turned on humanity and took the best of the Hunters with him, so the group is no doubt in shambles. In spite of that, X is still going to carry on the fight because X is, as Dr. Light says, the world's hope. A great way for the remake to go out. But what does it all mean? What do I think of Mega Man Maverick Hunter X? Well, it's really strange with me in this game. I think it's great. They had the challenge of remaking one of the most popular Mega Man games of all time, and the result is a game that stands right alongside it, but I guess that begs the question of if it's better or not. The weird thing about the game is that it does almost nothing wrong. It adds new features and modes, and it greatly expands upon the story and characters, and yet I almost never come back to this one. Is it one of the best video game remakes of all time? Well, that sounds like a dramatic way to describe the game, but I really can't think of much I'd have wanted them to do differently. I just feel more passionately about the original X. I have pretty much equal nostalgia for both, though. Back in 2015, I played the hell out of Maverick Hunter X. I'm talking about I brought my Vita to school and managed to play it during art class, and then played it through all the way again when we waited for the school open house that night levels of playing this game. On road trips, my go-to became Maverick Hunter X. This really is a game that I love, but X1 just does it for me in a way I can't describe. Doesn't help that I have had less incentive to revisit the remake over the years. As I've gotten older, I almost never play games portably. What's the need when I'm the one taking myself everywhere I go, you know? So the appeal of being able to take X1 on the go doesn't work for me as much. Also, X1 itself came out on the 3DS in 2016, so then it became a toss-up between which handheld I'd even want to bring somewhere for Mega Man X action. Nowadays, we have the X Legacy Collection on the Nintendo Switch, and that I have played in the limited amount of times I've brought my Switch somewhere outside with me. And Maverick Hunter X just wasn't on the X Legacy Collection. I get that these are all outside factors when thinking about which game I prefer, but the simple fact is Maverick Hunter X is a game that I love that I just don't really revisit besides maybe one playthrough a year at this rate. But every time I do, I love the experience. I played this game 3 times for this video alone, and when I was finished, I almost felt sad I was done with it because it was so good. And I guess that's always been the sad fact about the remake. It's always had a criminally small audience compared to X1, which has always been a readily accessible game in pretty much every console generation. I mentioned at the beginning that Maverick Hunter X did not sell well, and neither did Powered Up. And so, Capcom just decided to scrap the plans of remaking other Mega Man games on PSP. I always hear the PSP get blamed for this, like if it was made as a DS game it would have been better, but there are PSP games that sold well and DS Mega Man games that didn't. The series was pretty oversaturated at this time, and it seems great games like this got swept under the rug. Which is a shame because I would have loved to see a Maverick Hunter X too. To really see this version of X become the badass from later games. The original X2, without dialogue, showed how formidable X was just 6 months after X1 alone. Man, it would have been so awesome to see that game remade, but alas, this is the world we live in. What I can say is, at least Maverick Hunter X was a fantastic game, regardless of how well it sold. Definitely my 5th favorite Mega Man X game behind the first 4. Without question. But that's basically all I wanted to say for today. Stay tuned, because the Mega Man X 5 years later project is going to end with a new video on X Command Mission next week. Honestly, I have no idea what I'm going to say about that game, but I'll think of something. And then the final X review I will do until we get a new game, or X Corrupted drops, will be on X Dive, and that'll be that for Mega Man X. Hope everyone's looking forward to it. In the meantime, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.